Welcome. Come in, get comfortable. Take a breath. Imagine the scent of rain on ancient palace rooftops, the heavy, intoxicating smoke of sandalwood incense, and a silence so deep you can hear the rustle of silk and the beating of a heart that is trying desperately not to fall in love. Before we begin our journey today, I want to share something with you. If you want the full continuation of these stories, more uncensored 18+ Ancient BL content, extended scenes, and unlimited royal forbidden romance, you can join us on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. YouTube does not allow us to show or monetize everything freely here, so the deeper, more explicit, and much more intense versions are waiting for you over there. You can find the link in the description and the pinned comment. I'd love to see you there. Let the story begin. The great empire of Yeon was built on blood, iron, and the absolute terrifying will of its young emperor, Kalin. Kalin was 24 years old, but his eyes looked like they had lived 1,000 lifetimes of war. They called him the Iron Dragon. He was a man who felt nothing, showed nothing, and gave nothing. His palace was a sprawling city of gold and shadows, filled with trembling ministers, ambitious nobles, and thousands of guards. It was a place where one wrong word could cost you your life. But tonight, the great hall of the Yan Palace was completely silent. The war with the southern kingdom of Yue was over. Yan had won, and kneeling on the cold, polished obsidian floor of the throne room, surrounded by guards with drawn swords, was the final prize of that war. Prince Yeon of Yue. Yeon was 21. His kingdom had fallen. His royal robes were torn, stained with the dust and blood of a desperate, failed rebellion. Heavy iron chains wrapped around his wrists, the metal clinking softly as he breathed. But despite his defeat, despite the fact that he was kneeling before the man who had conquered his home, Yeon's back was perfectly straight. He refused to bow his head. From the high throne, Emperor Kalin looked down at him. The emperor was lounging slightly, one arm resting on the armrest of his golden throne, his cheek propped against his knuckles. He wore heavy robes of black silk embroidered with silver dragons, the fabric cascading down the steps. Kalin's dark eyes swept over the captive prince. He took in the wild, raven-black hair, falling into Yeon's defiant eyes. He took in the sharp, beautiful line of Yeon's jaw, clenched tight with pride. He took in the way Yeon's chest rose and fell, radiating a fierce, unbroken heat. So, Kalin's voice finally echoed through the massive hall. It was low, smooth, and dangerously calm, a voice that made the ministers shiver. "This is the fierce Prince Yeon, the last ember of the southern kingdom. I was told you fought like a demon on the battlefield." Yeon looked up, his golden brown eyes locking onto the emperor's cold gaze. There was no fear in him, only a burning, beautiful hatred. "And I was told the emperor of Yeon was a dragon," Yeon replied, his voice slightly raspy but steady. "Yet here you sit, hiding behind your guards, wearing stolen gold." A collective gasp echoed through the ministers. The head of the royal guard instantly drew his blade, stepping forward to strike Yeon down for his treasonous words. "Halt!" Kalin didn't raise his voice, but the single word cracked like a whip. The guard froze, instantly sheathing his sword and stepping back into the shadows. Kalin slowly stood up. The heavy rustle of his silk robes was the only sound in the room as he descended the jade steps of the throne. Step by step, closer and closer. Yeon didn't flinch. He watched the tall, imposing figure of the emperor approach. Up close, Kalin was even more intimidating. Broad shoulders, a sharp, aristocratic face carved from pale marble, and a scent of pine and cold winter air that seemed to swallow Yeon whole. Kalin stopped just inches from the kneeling prince. He was so close that Yeon could feel the warmth radiating from the emperor's body. The air between them suddenly felt incredibly heavy, charged with a strange, crackling electricity. Slowly, Kalin reached out. He didn't strike Yeon. Instead, his long, elegant fingers calloused from years of wielding a sword, gently brushed aside a stray lock of hair from Yeon's face. Yeon's breath hitched. His heart gave a sudden, traitorous thud against his ribs. The touch was too soft, too intimate for an enemy. Kalin's thumb rested lightly beneath Yeon's chin, tilting the prince's face up. Their eyes met. Deep, freezing black colliding with fierce, burning gold. "You have spirit, little prince," Kalin murmured, his voice dropping to a low, husky register meant only for Yeon's ears. It would be a shame to separate such a beautiful head from its shoulders. Yeon swallowed hard, hating how his skin burned where the emperor was touching him. Kill me then. I will not be a trophy in your court. Kalen's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. The thumb under Jeon's chin stroked the soft skin of his jaw for a fleeting second before pulling away. No, Kalen said, turning his back and walking slowly up the steps to his throne. Death is too easy for you, Prince Yeon. You are too proud. I think I will teach you how to bow. Kalen sat down, his eyes locking onto Yeon once more, filled with a dark, possessive hunger that made a shiver run down Jeon's spine. Take his chains off, Kalen commanded the guards. Wash him. Dress him in the robes of a servant. From this day forward, the Prince of Yue is my personal attendant. He will pour my tea, he will dress me, and he will sleep on the floor at the foot of my bed. Let the empire see how the southern kingdom serves me. Jeon's eyes widened. I would rather die, he shouted, struggling as the guards grabbed his arms. You do not have my permission to die, Kalen said coldly. But as he watched Yeon being dragged from the hall, the emperor's hand slowly closed into a tight fist over his own knee. He could still feel the warmth of Jeon's skin on his fingertips. Weeks passed, and the golden cage closed around Yeon. The palace was massive, a maze of red pillars, winding corridors, and quiet courtyards filled with blooming plum blossoms. But for Yeon, it was a prison. True to his word, Kalen had stripped Yeon of his royal titles. Yeon was forced to wear the pale blue silk robes of a palace attendant. But the emperor's game of humiliation wasn't exactly what the court expected. Yeon wasn't sent to the kitchens. He wasn't beaten. He wasn't paraded in front of the nobles. Instead, Kalen kept him hidden away in the deepest, most private chambers of the imperial pavilion, kept him terrifyingly close. Their daily routine became a silent, high-stakes dance. Every morning at dawn, Yeon had to enter the emperor's bedchamber. The room was always thick with the scent of sandalwood and night air. Yeon would stand by the edge of the massive, silk-draped bed, watching the emperor sleep. For a man who was known as a monster, Kalen looked strangely peaceful in his sleep. The hard lines of his face softened. His dark hair spread out over the pillows. In those quiet moments, Yeon would catch himself staring. He would look at the strong line of Kalen's throat, the broad expanse of his chest, exposed by his loose night robes. Yeon hated himself for noticing how handsome the emperor was. He hated the way his stomach tightened, the way his breath caught when Kalen shifted under the blankets. One morning, as Yeon reached out to pull back the bed curtains, a strong hand shot out and gripped his wrist. Yeon gasped, stumbling forward. Kalen's eyes snapped open. They weren't sleepy. They were sharp, predatory, and completely awake. The emperor pulled Yeon closer, the grip on his wrist firm but not bruising. Yeon was forced to lean over the bed, his face mere inches from Kalen's. The silence in the room was deafening. Yeon could feel Kalen's warm breath ghosting over his lips. He could see the faint stubble on the emperor's jaw. His heart began to hammer violently in his chest, so loud he was sure Kalen could hear it. You were staring, my prince, Kalen whispered, his voice thick with morning gravel. I was waiting for you to wake, Yeon lied, trying to pull his wrist away, but Kalen held fast, his thumb slowly rubbing over the delicate pulse point on the inside of Jeon's wrist. Kalen felt the rapid, fluttering heartbeat under his thumb. A dark, knowing look flashed in his eyes. Your heart is racing, Kalen noted softly, his gaze dropping to Jeon's lips for a fraction of a second before meeting his eyes again. Are you afraid of me, Yeon? I fear nothing, Yeon snapped, his cheeks flushing a deep, embarrassed red. Let go of me. Kalen held him there for 1 second longer, long enough for the air between them to grow thick and suffocating with a tension that felt entirely too dangerous. Then, slowly, he released Yeon's wrist. Bring me my robes, Kalen ordered, sitting up and turning his back. Yeon stepped away, his breath coming a little too fast, his skin burning where Kalen had touched him. He hated this. He hated the power Kalen had over him. Not just the political power, but this strange physical gravity that seemed to pull Yeon in, no matter how hard he fought it. The days turned into a slow-burn torture. Yeon poured Kalen's tea in the royal study, while the emperor read scrolls of state. Sometimes, Kalen would reach for the cup at the exact moment Yeon handed it to him. their fingers brushing against the hot porcelain. The contact would only last a second, but it felt like a spark of fire. Kalen would look up slowly, his dark eyes locking onto Jeon's, and neither of them would look away. It was a battle of wills. Who would break first? Who would look away first? Jeon refused to lower his eyes. And Kalen? Kalen looked at Jeon not like a servant, but like a starving man looking at a feast. One evening, a heavy thunderstorm rolled over the capital. The rain lashed against the paper windows of the imperial study. The wind howled, shaking the wooden frames. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a few flickering candles. Kalen was sitting at his low mahogany desk, reviewing military reports. Jeon was kneeling quietly at his side, grinding ink on an inkstone. The rhythmic, circular motion of the inkstick was the only sound besides the rain. Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder shook the palace. Jeon's hand slipped, and the heavy inkstick knocked over the water basin, spilling dark ink all over the edge of the desk and Kalen's sleeve. Jeon froze. In the palace, ruining the emperor's robes was a crime punishable by whipping. "Forgive me, your majesty," Jeon said, quickly grabbing a silk cloth to wipe the desk. His hands were trembling slightly. He reached over Kalen's arm to blot the ink, his face coming close to the emperor's shoulder. Kalen didn't move. He didn't yell. He just turned his head, looking at the side of Jeon's face. As Jeon leaned over to clean the spill, his soft hair brushed against Kalen's cheek. The faint scent of jasmine soap and rain radiating from Jeon's skin hit Kalen's senses. The emperor closed his eyes for a brief moment, breathing it in. "Jeon," Kalen said quietly. Jeon stopped wiping the desk. He was hovering over Kalen, their bodies just inches apart. "Yes, your majesty? Look at me." Jeon slowly turned his head. They were entirely too close. In the dim, flickering candlelight, the shadows played across Kalen's face, making him look less like an untouchable god and more like a deeply exhausted, lonely man. Kalen reached up. He took the ink-stained cloth from Jeon's trembling hand and tossed it aside. Then, his large hand cupped the side of Jeon's face. Jeon gasped softly, freezing in place. Kalen's palm was warm. His thumb gently stroked Jeon's cheekbone. The touch was so tender, it made Jeon's chest ache. "Why do you fight me so hard?" Kalen whispered, his eyes dropping to Jeon's mouth. The emperor's voice was stripped of its usual cold command. It sounded raw, hungry. "Because you stole my freedom," Jeon breathed out, unable to pull away from the warmth of Kalen's hand. "I kept you alive," Kalen murmured, leaning in slightly. The space between their lips was closing. Jeon could feel Kalen's breath on his own lips. His mind screamed at him to pull back, to slap the emperor, to run. But his body felt rooted to the floor. His eyes fluttered shut halfway, captivated by the intense, dark gravity of the man before him. "I kept you alive," Kalen repeated, his voice dropping to a low rumble, "because the thought of this world without you in it was something I could not accept." Jeon's breath hitched. Before he could process the confession, Kalen leaned in. Their noses brushed, the heavy, suffocating tension finally reaching its breaking point. But then, a sharp knock on the wooden doors echoed through the study. "Your Majesty," a guard called out from outside. "An urgent message from the northern border." The spell shattered. Jeon jerked back, nearly knocking over the inkstone again, his chest heaving as he scrambled to his feet. He bowed his head, his face burning furiously, hiding his eyes in the shadows. Kalen slowly lowered his hand, his jaw clenching tight. The emperor took a deep, steadying breath, his eyes lingering on Jeon's trembling frame for a long moment before turning toward the door. "Enter," Kalen commanded, his voice back to the cold, icy tone of the Iron Dragon. But as the guards rushed in, Jeon pressed a hand over his own heart. It was beating so fast it hurt. He realized, with a terrifying clarity, that if the guards hadn't interrupted, he wouldn't have pulled away. And if you are enjoying this forbidden royal tension, remember, the extended and uncensored 18+ continuation of this slow-burn romance is available on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment. Now, let's return to the palace. The dynamic between them shifted after that rainy night. It was no longer just master and servant. It was a dangerous, silent game of unspoken desire. They walked around each other carefully, like two wolves circling in the snow. But the imperial court was not blind. the ministers began to notice. They noticed how the cold, ruthless emperor never let his captive prince out of his sight. They noticed how Kalin would wave away his beautiful concubines, preferring to sit in silence while Yeon read to him in the library. They noticed how, during long council meetings, Kalin's eyes would always drift to the corner of the room where Yeon stood waiting. And in the imperial court, favoritism was a weapon. If a weakness was exposed, someone would exploit it. Winter arrived, blanketing the Yeon palace in thick, pure white snow. The red pillars and curved, golden rooftops looked striking against the gray sky. To celebrate the first snow, Kalin hosted a massive banquet in the Hall of Harmonious Light. Dozens of nobles, generals, and wealthy ministers gathered, drinking warm plum wine and watching musicians play the pipa. Kalin sat at the head table, elevated above the rest. He wore breathtaking robes of crimson and gold, looking every bit the terrifying conqueror. Yeon knelt at his right side, slightly behind him, dressed in his quiet blue robes, his duty to simply pour the emperor's wine. The atmosphere in the hall was festive, but underneath the laughter, there was a sharp edge of politics. Minister Zhao, a fat, greedy man who desperately wanted his daughter to become the empress, stood up with his cup raised. He had drunk too much wine, and his face was flushed. "Your Majesty," Minister Zhao called out, smiling a greasy smile, "we celebrate the prosperity of Yan, and we celebrate your absolute victory over the weak, pathetic southern kingdom of Yue." Jian's hands tightened on the jade wine pitcher. His knuckles turned white. Minister Zhao noticed Jian's reaction, and his smile widened cruelly. "Ah, look at the little southern prince, reduced to a common tavern boy, pouring drinks for his betters." The minister stepped forward, holding out his empty cup toward Jian. "Since you are nothing but a servant now, boy, come here and pour my wine." The music stopped. The hall went dead silent. Everyone knew that Yeon was Kalin's personal attendant. Asking the emperor's private servant to pour wine for a minister was a massive insult. It was a test to see just how much Kalin cared about his captive. Yeon froze. He looked at Minister Zhao, then down at the jade pitcher in his hands. The humiliation burned his throat like acid. If he refused, he would be disobeying a noble of the court, a crime for a servant. If he obeyed, he would be degrading himself to the level of a common slave. Slowly, Yeon started to rise, his eyes dark with suppressed fury, intending to pour the wine and swallow his pride. But before his knees could leave the mat, a heavy, terrifying sound echoed through the hall. Clack! Kalin had set his golden wine cup down on the wooden table. He didn't slam it, he just set it down with a firm, deliberate force. But the sound made every single person in the room flinch. Kalin didn't stand up. He leaned back in his throne, his dark eyes locking onto Minister Zhao. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "Minister Zhao," Kalin said, his voice a soft, deadly whisper that carried across the silent hall. Yes, Your Majesty?" the minister stuttered, his arrogant smile melting into sudden terror. Kalin slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the trembling nobles. "He is Prince Yeon of Yue. He was conquered by my hand. He belongs to me. He breathes the air in my palace because I allow it. He wears the silk of my court because I provide it." Kalin leaned forward, his eyes flashing with a possessive, dangerous fire. "He pours wine for the emperor. He does not pour for pigs." Minister Zhao collapsed onto his knees, trembling violently. "Mercy, Your Majesty. I spoke out of turn. I beg your forgiveness." "Guards," Kalin said coldly, not even looking at the man anymore. "Cut off the hand that held the cup, then throw him out into the snow." The hall erupted into gasps as guards seized the screaming minister, dragging him out of the room. The remaining nobles lowered their heads, terrified, staring at their plates. Kalin picked up his cup again, holding it out behind him without looking back. Jian's hands were shaking as he leaned forward, pouring the warm plum wine into Kalin's cup. As the liquid filled the gold vessel, Kalin tilted his head back slightly, speaking so softly that only Jian could hear. "No one disrespects what is mine," Kalin whispered. Jian's breath hitched. He stared at the back of Kalin's neck, a chaotic storm of emotions raging inside him. He should hate this man. He should hate the possessive, arrogant way Kalin claimed him. But as he looked at the emperor's broad shoulders, a deep, forbidden warmth bloomed in Jian's chest. For the first time in his life, someone had protected him. Not for politics, not for duty, just for him. The banquet ended early, the mood utterly ruined by the emperor's wrath. Later that night, the snow was falling heavily over the palace. Yeon was walking down the long, open-air wooden corridor that connected the banquet hall to the imperial sleeping chambers. He was carrying a lantern, walking a few steps behind Kalin. The night was quiet, too quiet. The guards usually stationed at the corridor intersections were gone. Kalin slowed his steps, his hand subtly dropping to the hilt of the sword he always wore at his waist. He was a warrior first, an emperor second. His instincts were screaming. "Yeon," Kalin said softly, not turning around. "Drop the lantern. Step behind me." "What?" Yeon whispered, confused. "Do it now." Before Yeon could react, the roof tiles above them shattered. 4 figures dressed in complete white, camouflage for the snow, dropped down from the roof, drawing curved, blackened steel blades. Assassins. They didn't speak. They lunged straight for the emperor. Kalin drew his sword in a flash of silver, blocking the first strike with a loud clang of metal. He kicked the second assassin in the chest, sending him flying into the wooden railing. "Run, Yeon," Kalin roared, parrying another deadly strike. But Yeon didn't run. He couldn't. His legs refused to carry him away from Kalin. He stood frozen, the lantern dropping from his hand and smashing on the wooden floor, the flame flickering out. Kalin was fighting 3 men at once. He was brilliant, his movements fluid and deadly, cutting down one of the assassins with a swift strike to the throat. Blood sprayed hot across the snow, but he was surrounded. From the shadows of the garden, a 5th assassin emerged. This one held a small, deadly repeating crossbow. He raised it, aiming directly at Kalin's exposed back, while the emperor was busy fighting off the remaining 2 swordsmen. Yeon saw the glint of the crossbow bolt in the moonlight. Time seemed to slow down. "Kalin!" Yeon screamed, abandoning his titles, abandoning his pride, abandoning everything. His body moved before his brain could think. Yeon lunged forward, throwing himself between Kalin's back and the assassin in the snow. Thwack. The sound was sickening. Yeon gasped, his eyes going wide as a burning, tearing pain ripped through his left shoulder. The force of the crossbow bolt threw him backward, straight into Kalin. Kalin spun around, catching Yeon before he hit the ground. The emperor's eyes widened in absolute horror as he saw the black-fletched arrow buried deep in Yeon's shoulder. Blood was already soaking through the pale blue silk, turning it a deep, ugly purple. Something inside Kalin snapped. The cold, calculated emperor vanished, replaced by an enraged, untamed beast. With a feral roar, Kalin swung his sword in a massive, sweeping arc, decapitating one assassin and slicing open the chest of the other. He didn't even bother with the crossbowmen in the distance. The palace guards were finally rushing into the courtyard, yelling and drawing their weapons. Kalin dropped his sword. It clattered uselessly on the wooden floor. He fell to his knees, pulling Yeon fully into his arms. Yeon, Kalin's voice broke. He pressed a hand over the wound, trying to stop the blood, his own hands shaking violently. "Yeon, look at me. Open your eyes. Look at me." Yeon let out a shallow, ragged breath. The pain was blinding, radiating from his shoulder down to his fingertips. His vision was blurring, the edges of the world turning black. He looked up, seeing Kalin's face hovering above him. The emperor's sharp features were twisted in pure panic. "Why did you—" Kalin choked out, pulling Yeon tighter against his chest. "Why did you jump in front of me? You hate me. You were supposed to run." Yeon offered a weak, trembling smile. His uninjured hand slowly lifted, his blood-stained fingers weakly brushing against the lapel of Kalin's crimson robes. I don't know," Yeon whispered, his voice incredibly faint. I think I stopped hating you a long time ago." Yeon's eyes rolled back, and his hand fell limp against the wooden floor. No, Yeon!" Kalin's scream echoed through the snowy courtyard, a sound of absolute, devastating heartbreak that would haunt the palace guards for the rest of their lives. Kalin scooped Yeon up into his arms, ignoring the blood soaking into his own clothes. He turned to the captain of the guard, who had just arrived, his eyes black with murderous fury. "Kill the remaining assassin," Kalin ordered, his voice trembling with a terrifying, suppressed rage. "And bring the imperial physician to my chambers. If this boy dies, I will execute every single doctor in the capital." Kalen sprinted down the corridor, holding Jian tightly against his chest, praying to gods he hadn't believed in for years. When Jian finally opened his eyes, he thought he was dead. The light in the room was soft, golden, and warm. He was lying on something incredibly soft, surrounded by the heavy, comforting scent of sandalwood and winter pine. He blinked, trying to clear his blurry vision. Above him were sweeping curtains of dark, gold-embroidered silk. He wasn't on his little pallet on the floor, he was in the Emperor's bed. Jian tried to sit up, but a sharp, burning pain in his shoulder made him gasp and fall back against the pillows. His shoulder was tightly bandaged, and he was dressed in a soft, clean white inner robe. "Don't move." The voice came from the side of the bed. It was hoarse, rough, and exhausted. Jian turned his head. Sitting in a chair pulled right up to the edge of the mattress was Kalen. The Emperor looked terrible. He was still wearing his inner robes, untied and messy. His hair was loose, hanging over his shoulders in a tangled mess. There were deep, dark bags under his eyes, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "How long?" Jian rasped, his throat dry. 3 days, Kalen replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. The bolt was tipped with poison. "You burned with a fever for 3 days. You almost didn't make it." Jian looked at the Emperor. The proud, arrogant Iron Dragon looked utterly broken. "You stayed here?" Jian asked softly. Kalen let out a dry, bitter laugh, running a hand through his messy hair. "Stayed here? I haven't left this room. I haven't held a court council. I haven't eaten. I sat here, watching you breathe, terrified that every breath would be your last." Kalen stood up. He walked to the edge of the bed and carefully sat down on the mattress beside Jian. The mattress dipped under his weight. He looked down at Jian, his dark eyes filled with a storm of emotions so intense it made Jian's breath catch. Slowly, Kalen reached out. His hand was trembling slightly as he gently brushed a lock of hair away from Jian's pale forehead. "Why did you do it, Jian?" Kalen asked, his voice cracking. "I conquered your home. I put you in chains. I forced you to kneel. Why would you give your life for mine?" Jian looked up into those dark, tortured eyes. The invisible wall between them, the wall of pride, duty, and war, had finally crumbled to dust. "Because," Jian whispered, his good hand slowly reaching up to cover Kalen's hand on his cheek, "you kept me alive. You protected me. And because seeing that arrow pointed at your back hurt more than taking it myself." Kalen closed his eyes, a shuddering breath escaping his lips. He turned his face into Jian's palm, pressing a soft, lingering kiss against the inside of Jian's wrist, right over his pulse. "You are a fool, my prince," Kalen murmured against Jian's skin, his breath hot and trembling. Kalen opened his eyes and leaned over Jian. He supported his weight on his forearms, making sure not to press on Jian's injured shoulder. He was hovering just inches above him, the heavy silk curtains of the bed boxing them into their own private, secluded world. The tension that had been building between them for months was no longer a silent, dangerous thing. It was entirely out in the open. It was heavy, intoxicating, and desperate. Kalen's gaze dropped to Jian's lips. "I told myself I would break you," Kalen whispered, his voice dark and velvety, dripping with raw need. "I told myself you were just a spoil of war, a toy. But I was lying to myself from the moment I saw you in that throne room." Jian's heart was hammering against his ribs. He looked up at the Emperor, his own eyes heavy with unspoken desire. "What am I to you now, Kalen?" he asked, using the Emperor's name for the first time. The sound of his name on Jian's lips made Kalen's eyes darken. "You are my ruin," Kalen whispered fiercely. "You are the only weakness I have ever had. You are my captive, Jian, but I am completely at your mercy." With a slow, agonizingly deliberate movement, Kalen leaned down. Jian didn't pull away. Jian didn't pull away. He didn't fight. He closed his eyes, tilting his chin up, his good arm wrapping around the back of Kalen's neck, pulling the Emperor down. Their lips finally met. It wasn't a violent kiss. It was soft, deeply emotional, and full of desperate relief. Kalen kissed him like a starving man tasting water for the first time. His lips parted Jian's softly, entirely gentle. Terrified of breaking him, yet unable to hold back the consuming hunger that had been torturing him for months. Jian let out a soft sigh into the kiss, his fingers twisting into the silk of Kalen's dark hair. The warmth of Kaelin's mouth, the taste of him, the heavy, protective weight of his body. It was intoxicating. Kaelin deepened the kiss, his tongue brushing against Jeon's, tasting the lingering sweetness of the medicinal tea he had been drinking. The kiss turned heavy, sensual, slow burning. Kaelin's hand slid from Jeon's cheek down his neck, his thumb tracing the line of Jeon's collarbone just above the bandages. Every touch felt like electricity. Every breath they shared in the dim, quiet bedchamber sealed their fate. They were no longer emperor and captive. They were two men, irrevocably bound by blood, survival, and a forbidden, all-consuming love. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing heavily, their foreheads resting against each other. "You are never sleeping on the floor again," Kaelin whispered, his lips brushing against Jeon's as he spoke. Jeon let out a weak, breathy laugh. "Is that an imperial decree?" "It is," Kaelin murmured, pressing a soft kiss to the tip of Jeon's nose. "Tomorrow I will announce it to the court. You are no longer an attendant. You are no longer a captive." Kaelin pulled back slightly, looking deep into Jeon's golden eyes. "You will stand by my side, as my equal, and if anyone in this empire dares to question it, I will burn them to ash." Jeon looked at the fierce, protective devotion in Kaelin's eyes, and for the first time since his kingdom fell, he felt entirely, completely safe. He smiled, pulling Kaelin down for another slow, heavy kiss. "All right, my emperor," Jeon whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." And that is where we leave our emperor and his fiercely beautiful prince, for now. But you know, a royal bedchamber, heavy silk curtains, and a newly confessed, passionate romance means this night is far from over. If you want the next part, the fully uncensored continuation, and more unlimited 18+ ancient royal BL stories, where we explore exactly what happens behind those closed palace doors, come join Spicy Ancient BL on Patreon. YouTube has its limits, but our Patreon has none. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment. Come join the inner palace and let the real story begin. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next tale.